Let's jump to this story from the Wall Street Journal. Kamala Harris's agenda for black men will be open to all. Ooh, I can't wait to get my piece of these black men's money. So what was the point of Kamala Harris announcing that she was going to like legalize drugs and protect the crypto assets of black men if in the end it turns out to have been an illegal proposal that will now be open to anyone and everyone?
Yeah, the point was to try and get black men to vote for her.
Exactly.
It was literally, that was all it could be. And the administration knows that these proposals are illegal. She should know these proposals are illegal because her administration, the Department of Agriculture, was sued by white farmers claiming that, you know, the Department of Agriculture's program to prioritize black farmers for loans was actually in complete violation of, you know, everything, which it was. And the judge came out in the ruling and said, yeah, you can't do that. You can't prioritize loans based on race. You can't try and correct past discrimination by discriminating now. That's totally against the rules.
Especially not when it comes to food production. If there's one thing you really do not want DEI for, it's food production, right? The purpose of farming is to feed all of us, not to make us feel all cheap and sentimental and good about ourselves because we have equity in farming. Like, that's pointless.
Yeah. I agree with you.
But we also have to consider this is a campaign promise. So there's two things. Firstly, I don't think she cares about following through with any of her campaign promises. I also don't think she cares about the law. So it's anyone's guess whether this is just a promise that was made that was never intended to be fulfilled or whether they're going to try to break the law anyway. Biden has still tried, right? His student loan forgiveness proposal was struck down, and they said that he couldn't do that, but he still wanted to move forward with it. So they don't care. They're above the law.
Let me read. This is really funny. It says, Vice President Kamala Harris's opportunity agenda for black men aims to shore up support from a pillar of the Democratic base with a key section promising $1 million loans that are fully forgivable to black entrepreneurs and others to start a business. Others is doing a lot of lifting there. Well, it literally says that. It says it turns out that the words "and others" are doing a ton of work. The campaign says that the program listed under black men, the Black Men Agenda, will be open to all Americans on a race-neutral basis. And others. That is so good. Guys, I'm hereby announcing that I'm ordering pizza for Seamus and others.
You're telling me I don't even have to pretend to be black to get all these benefits?
No, you don't.
I don't even have to fake it, like in an affirmative action way?
Seamus, if you help me clean this place up, I will order pizza for you and others.
But you see, but that's a nice thing. It has to be
others is me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a totally different thing. And it's $1,020,000 loans forgivable. That is a huge amount of money. That's a huge sum of money. And we're watching people's homes get washed away in North Carolina. But like, this is the program. She also, part of the marijuana legalization program that she's offering is very similar to the one that was offered in New York. And what happened in New York is New York decriminalized weed and said that people who had passed marijuana convictions would be eligible for these licenses to open weed shops. But by the time they came up with their plan to give these licenses out, there were already all these weed shops all over the city. And so the city's been trying to like claw back the decriminalization to stop bodegas from selling loose joints.
The domination from Democrats on their black constituency, that is how they win over so much of the black community. It's this dual-handed sword in a way because it's hard to maintain it. You won't be able to go much higher than that, and chances are that the other party's only going to be able to kind of make their inroads with the black community. That's what the Trump campaign has been trying to do because, I mean, if you're at 80%, there isn't much more of the community to win over. So it's right for the picking.
I mean, Obama met with a bunch of young black men and said that I feel like you guys just don't want to vote for a woman. You got what is the white dudes for hairs commercial? It's time to get over that.
Get over it. I'm strong enough to let a woman tell me what to do.
They are really worried about the woman thing.
They're really worried about it.
Yeah.
Man, that ad was great, wasn't it?
But there's like 3 of them where they're basically like, please vote for a woman. I just don't see it. But it's also crazy that so many young black men have shifted away from the Democratic Party that Obama has to be like, guys, is it because you won't vote for a woman? Like, you got to do it.
Well, here's another thing that people should really consider.
They knew this before but they brought her in.
I mean, if anyone here was considering voting for this particular woman, here's something to consider. When Obama was elected, even though I didn't like his policies, right? And Matt Walsh has talked about this, but pretty much any conservative who was voting in this election or that election at that time will tell you, I wasn't glad he won, but if there was one silver lining that could have come from him being president, it was that race relations would improve. America wouldn't be seen as a racist nation anymore. And then race relations got way worse. So what does that tell us?
Isn't
okay, if you elect a woman president, you are not going to heal some gender divide in this country. It's just going to be played upon more. It's just going to be played upon more, and the division's going to get way worse culturally.
That's a really good point. Yeah, because after Obama was elected, you can track it in the New York Times and in all of the news media, the incidence of the word race, racism, race relations, all of that stuff really skyrocketed. And
yeah, but I don't think it's related to Obama.
Well, it may not be,
you can
but
see in LexisNexis all terms related to.
What do you think it's related to? Why do you think racism
social media algorithms
was totally fine and everybody was pretty much fine to madness?
Facebook.
It went from like
Facebook.
We have equality in the country to insanity.
Facebook.
You think entirely it's Facebook?
100%. And I'll give the rundown again. I do it a couple times a year. So if you look at LexisNexis, you can see the instances of certain words' appearance in newspapers around the world, not just in the United States. So Obama.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yep. It has nothing to do with Obama because it happened in every single country. What likely happened is that when Facebook implemented its algorithmic feed, when it initially started, it was reverse chronological, but they realized that once you got to around 300 friends and or liked pages, things you were following, you couldn't keep up with the changes, and this was resulting in a lower retention time on the website. So Facebook said, okay, let's use an algorithm to show people what they're more likely to want to see so they stay on the platform longer. Hence, if you post, one of the tricks on Facebook is to post, I just got married and had a kid. No, I didn't. I just had to post that. Hey, we're having a pizza party tonight. Come hang out. Because that way Facebook will put to the top of everyone's feeds. So what happens is you have advertisers, and they're trying to figure out what content they can produce that's going to get a lot of traction on the algorithm. And so what they found was, one, rage shares more than any other emotion. There's people like cute animals and things like that, and saving animals, they do really well. But anger generates the most amount of shares. It's almost entirely among women as well. I worked for a company. When I worked for Fusion, they had a marketing guy who laid this all out, how this is how he said moms are the key demographic for sharing content and generating views on Facebook. So what happens is in the late 2000s, they implement the algorithmic feed, which is basically words that are more likely to get clicked on are more likely to be shown. You ended up with BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, Mike.com, etc., doing this massive shift when they realized, hey, we wrote 10 articles today. One article was, John Kerry says this. The next article was police brutality, black man beaten. Guess which one got 1 million views?
Right.
Then they go, guys, we just made 10 grand off that article. People want this. Write more of it. But they didn't want it. Facebook was just showing it to more people because of the algorithm. Then something stupendous happened. In the early 2010s, they discovered that if you write about X, you'll get X views. If you write about Y, you'll get Y views. But if you write about XY, you'll get XY views, which is a multiplication, not a doubling. So then you started to see articles about sexist, racist cops. Then you started to get insane articles, which people have made fun of at Vice.com, where it's like transgender ketamine dealers of Nicaragua getting arrested and facing police brutality. And you're like, what is that headline?
Everyone wants to read that.
Jamming as many algorithmic keywords as possible. The inverse did happen. The rise of alt-right and white nationalist content began to emerge as well, because there was a counter backlash to this algorithmic push. The issue? Our society thinks those things are bad. Advertisers don't want to put money on them. But if you go to an advertiser and say, do you care if your ad appears on content that opposes racism? They'll say no. Do you care if your ad appears on content that promotes white supremacy? They'll say absolutely not. We don't want that. This created a pressure in one direction where all the alt-right channels, and not even necessarily white nationalists, but counter, anti-woke and channels that were like, what's wrong with being white? Started getting knocked way down, getting suspended and banned, and then all of the ultra far left crazy cultural Marxist stuff started getting promoted. That system is now cracking and buckling as Disney lost $1 billion on a bunch of their movies. Kevin Feige reportedly fired a bunch of their activists. They were like, hey, wait a minute. We've gone way too far in this direction because there was no check on it. This is why in the Obama years, we saw a massive spike of all these terms and all this terminology. It exists well outside of Obama. The LexisNexis data is crazy when you look at it. Every word related to social justice skyrockets. Mm-hmm. Now, it could be that you have ideologues working at Twitter and Facebook, and so they said, these are the words we want shared. I don't think it's the case. I think it was more emergent. When somebody would see a video about police brutality, they'd react to it. They'd get angry. It would slowly generate more traffic, and it would cause an increase in people writing articles about these things. It's what advertisers would fund, so it created a natural push in this direction, and that's why you ended up with...
Are you just blaming the social media networks and the platforms, or are you blaming the users or maybe bad users on the platforms at all, too?
It's the platforms.
You don't blame any of the people who are doing bad stuff? Okay, well...
What do you mean doing bad stuff?
Because there are people who have to make those articles and make those posts, and then
What's wrong? There's absolutely nothing wrong with writing an article saying, I am upset about police brutality. The problem is that Facebook created a mechanism by which it was the only thing you could produce that would generate revenue. Now, Facebook makes almost no revenue for these companies. Video is everything. Where are the big blogs these days, right? Most of them have gone defunct. But in the 2010s, in the late 2000s and 2010s, you were printing money. There was a website in the top 400 websites in the world that only wrote about police brutality because of Facebook. Millions of fans, millions of followers. That is an algorithmic push. The average person doesn't care about that stuff. Like, they care, right? If you saw a video where it's like a cop's beating a guy, you're gonna be like, hey man, that's not cool. But for every single article you read ever, that was Facebook driving it into people's minds. The best part about this is, and I mean that facetiously, a 10-year-old kid who signs up for Facebook, you're supposed to be 13, but he does. And the only thing he's seeing at the time is an endless feed of police brutality. 10 years later, Facebook is still dominated by this. YouTube is dominated by this. This kid is 17 years old going, this whole country is racist and they murder black people every single day. And then you see these men in the street interviews where they say, how many innocent unarmed black people do you think are murdered every year? And they go, 50,000. Because the only thing they would ever see on their social media was the far left ideology being jammed down their throats.
I'm curious your thoughts. Obviously, I think 2020 was the most poignant example of how the government can tip the scales when it comes to the censorship on these platforms or promoting certain narratives. I agree with what you're saying, but I do think it maybe treats these social media platforms as sort of like independent entities away from any government overreach. So when do you think that the kind of censorship apparatus that we've seen now developed to help shape the landscape?
So what happens is, following this massive push, you end up with the backlash. The media called it the white lash. We started seeing a lot of channels that were white pride. They weren't necessarily alt-right or white nationalist, but they were people being like, you can't attack me for being white. It's okay to be white, things like that. That escalated until you got overt white nationalists active on platforms. And then these platforms were like, we have to ban all these people. There was an adpocalypse, started removing them. I think it's actually... Through these media machines, the politicians and the deep state are literally drinking the refuse of these platforms. Their minds become warped jelly. They then say, this is the world I want to live in, and they seek to implement that world. So, for example, Jack Dorsey said that Twitter was the free speech wing of the free speech party. Through these pressures that existed naturally in the market, Jack Dorsey was pumping feces right down his throat. And I mean that figuratively, obviously. He's taking the human refuse ideas of a broken algorithm and warping his mind. The only thing he sees when he's on X is everyone posting about nothing but social justice. He then can't see outside of his bubble. Case in point, when I went on and did that debate on Joe Rogan, and I said, your misgendering policy is biased. And he goes, no, it's not. How is it biased? And I said, because conservatives think misgendering is calling a female male pronouns. And a liberal thinks misgendering is calling someone the pronouns they don't wish to be called. And it's almost like he had never heard that argument in his life. So what happens is they start consuming a reality based on the algorithms that they've built, warping their frame of mind. You end up with young people who are entering into the intelligence agencies, entering into politics, and they're saying this is the way the world should be. They then go to the social media platforms and say, we don't want far-right white nationalist fascists like Donald Trump winning. We can't allow that to happen because they're swimming in the refuse of their own of the social media creation.
I also think, too, it's quite interesting if you analyze government grants coming from the United States government to combat what they call misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories. Those terms were only really started to be heavily used circa like 2016. If you look, it's like 97% of them are post 2016. And I think you nailed it when you said it was tethered to Trump winning, because I think they knew they had to rebrand, right? The ad hominem attacks weren't necessarily working. So that's when you see this new misinformation, disinformation push, because it's just sort of a weird thing. They act like misinformation is like the largest existential crisis to the United States, but 10 years ago, you never heard about it. And I think if you go global, which I would argue a lot of this is in the same way that the UK and the United States have a weird sort of axis of evil when it comes to funding these censorship programs, that it's all inextricably linked to Brexit too. I think they try to spin that, right, as kind of a result of disinformation. And it gets to, I'll never forget, there was a grant from the National Science Foundation just about a year ago where they weren't content with just debunking misinformation, but they wanted to pre-bunk misinformation, particularly tied to the rise of populism. And it was sort of saying the quiet part out loud. But I think that they realized that the ad hominem assaults weren't working, so they had to pivot to the misinformation strategy.
When Bud Light happened, I predicted we will find out that a millennial woman who recently got a promotion launched this campaign, which is destroying the brand. And I was correct. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah, that is what happened.
Yeah.
Because it is these millennials who have very little literacy in media go on a Facebook, and the only things they see is being slammed with social justice because websites like Mike.com were chasing money. And this is there's evidence of this. Mike.com started off as a Ron Paul libertarian website. Why? The Ron Paul love revolution was viral online, and it generated traffic and made money. When the algorithm started to change, Mike.com turned into a social justice website that pursued weird leftist garbage. Mm-hmm. That was it. They were chasing the money. So this millennial woman lives in this reality all day, every day. She gets an entry-level position at Bud Light. 10 years later, she's promoted to a VP of marketing. And then she says, we don't care about white men anymore. And they're like, whatever you say, it's your campaign and your job. And then the company implodes. Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.